In the freezing winter of 1875, 3 quiet Kansas counties were rocked by a string of deaths, each one more unsettling than the last. The victims, elderly, ill, or simply too weak to defend themselves. The connection, all of them had hired the same young caregiver. He called himself Thomas Whitfield. He was polite, well-spoken, only 19 years old, and every time someone died under his care, he disappeared, just days before anyone started asking questions. But here's the real nightmare. Thomas Whitfield wasn't his real name. His real name was Timothy Caldwell, and he had escaped from the Missouri State Hospital 7 years earlier, after being locked away for terrifying reasons. Skull and crossbones, a quiet monster. Timothy wasn't like other kids. He didn't cry. He didn't laugh. He didn't talk much. But what the neighbors whispered about was worse than anything he ever said. As a child, he was found torturing farm animals in the woods. His parents tried to get help, but no doctor could explain his behavior. At 12 years old, he vanished into the Missouri asylum system, and the town of Sedalia tried to forget him. But Timothy Caldwell didn't disappear. He was watching, waiting, and learning how to kill. House the perfect cover. By 1875, Timothy had changed his name to Thomas Whitfield and moved through Kansas offering end-of-life care to sick and elderly people. Families welcomed him into their homes. They trusted him with their loved ones. And he always left with their deepest thanks, and a fresh body behind him. Thomas said he had trained under a country doctor in Missouri, and though he had no formal schooling, his medical knowledge was shockingly precise. He talked like a doctor. He acted like one. And more importantly, he charged just enough money to seem professional, but not so much that families got suspicious. He chose his patients carefully. Veterans with fading memories, grandmothers with dementia, fathers too sick to move or speak. And always, he left before anyone noticed what was really happening. Scroll the first doubt. Dr. Benjamin Wheeler, the county physician in Leavenworth, first met Thomas in March 1875. Thomas had just cared for a woman named Martha Henley, who died of consumption. Everything seemed normal, until Thomas started asking strange questions. How do you fill out the death certificate? What kind of proof do you need for cause of death? Did they ever open an investigation? Wheeler felt something was off. Thomas didn't act sad. He wasn't shaken. In fact, he described Martha's final moments like a scientist describing an experiment. But the family praised him. They said he stayed up with her all night. That he gave her medicine with care. That he helped her pass peacefully. There was no sign of foul play. So Wheeler let it go, for now. Man standing always watching. Thomas's next patient was Samuel Morrison, a 73-year-old stroke victim. His son, Robert, had hired Thomas based on the Henleys' glowing recommendation. Thomas stayed 4 weeks. Neighbors saw him walking the property at dawn, carrying medical tools or just staring into the fields. When asked, he said it helped clear his head. Samuel Morrison died early one morning of another stroke, just like Thomas said might happen. Again, Thomas showed no emotion. He asked about paperwork, about what doctors look for. And again, the family had nothing but praise. But Wheeler had seen enough to start seeing a pattern. Upward trend the pattern. Everywhere Thomas went, death followed. Always elderly, always ill, always alone with Thomas in their final days. But he never stayed in one town too long. He moved from county to county in a slow, careful circle. By the time he came back around, people had forgotten his name, but never the kindness he had shown. He was hiding in plain sight. Warning a different kind of patient. The man who finally saw through Thomas was Reverend Jonathan Hartwell, a respected 67-year-old pastor in the small town of Oskaloosa. He had heart problems but was still mentally sharp. His daughter Elizabeth hired Thomas after a bad episode left the Reverend bedridden. For the first 2 weeks, things seemed to improve. But then, strange things began happening. The Reverend called his daughter to his bedside one morning and said something that chilled her. Greater than, "There's something wrong with that boy. I watched while sleeping." Hartwell told Elizabeth that Thomas had been asking strange questions, not about medicine, but about the church, about family money, about whether they kept cash in the house. But the worst part, he said he'd woken up several times in the middle of the night and seen Thomas just standing there, beside his bed, watching him. Not checking his pulse, not giving him medication, just watching. And the look in his eyes wasn't that of a caregiver. It was something else. Something cold. Something curious. Something inhuman. Fire next time. Before we continue with what happened next, make sure you've subscribed. Part 2 will take you deeper into the chilling truth behind Thomas Whitfield's past, and the secrets hidden in his journal. This is not just a story about murder. This is the story of how evil hides behind kindness. And how sometimes, the most dangerous monsters are the ones who smile. Would you like me to format this into a video script format, including narration cues and pacing suggestions for editing? Or move on to part 2? Part 2, the culmination project. Headphone: if you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch it first. Because what happens next only makes sense if you know who Thomas Whitfield really is. Bell subscribe so you don't miss what this monster does next. Something was wrong. That afternoon, while Elizabeth Hartwell was in the kitchen preparing lunch, she heard her father cry out from his bedroom. Not a cough, not a groan, but a sharp, panicked shout. She dropped the knife she was holding and ran down the hall. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Thomas Whitfield was standing over Reverend Hartwell's bed, a pillow in his hands. He quickly stepped back and said he was adjusting the pillow to help the Reverend breathe easier. But Reverend Hartwell was unconscious, his face pale and lips trembling. Thomas said it had been a heart episode. Maybe a small stroke. He claimed he was just trying to make the Reverend more comfortable when he collapsed. But something didn't feel right. Dr. Wheeler was called again. He examined the Reverend and confirmed that some kind of cardiac event had happened. The Reverend would live, but when he regained consciousness a few hours later, he said something that sent chills down Drive. Wheeler's spine. Greater than, he tried to smother me. Bed the truth revealed. Hartwell described it clearly. He'd woken up to find Thomas pressing a pillow against his face. When he tried to struggle, the pressure only increased. He couldn't breathe. He thought he was going to die. When confronted, Thomas didn't panic. He looked shocked, concerned, and calm. He said the Reverend must have been confused. That cardiac patients often have hallucinations or false memories. That he had only been helping. And the worst part, it sounded believable. Dr. Wheeler wanted to believe the Reverend. But Thomas had done nothing illegal. No one had seen it happen. There was no proof. But this time, Drive, Wheeler didn't let it go. He started digging. And what he found would open the doors to a nightmare. Open folder: 17 bodies. One name. Working with officials from neighboring counties, Wheeler began looking into Thomas's past patients. In just 6 months, 17 people had died under Thomas Whitfield's care. All elderly, all sick, all seemed like natural deaths. But 17, that wasn't coincidence. That was a pattern. He also discovered that some families had noticed small thefts. Missing jewelry, disappeared cash. They had brushed it off as stress, grief, or disorganization. Now, it looked like something else. Even worse, the letters of recommendation Thomas used. Fake. The families in Missouri that supposedly praised his work didn't exist. Thomas Whitfield was a ghost, built out of lies. And Dr. Wheeler realized he needed help. Fast. Satellite dish the telegram. Wheeler sent a message to Missouri, to a man named Drive Samuel Harding. Harding had once worked at the Missouri State Hospital, the same place a dangerous boy named Timothy Caldwell had escaped from 7 years ago. Hours later, a reply came. Greater than, stop investigating immediately. Stop. Boy from Sedalia. Stop. Extremely dangerous. Stop. Will arrive Kansas soonest. Drive. Harding. Open book. The man WHO knew the monster. Dr. Harding arrived in Oskaloosa 3 days later. He had spent 7 years tracking mysterious deaths across the Midwest. Deaths just like these. He brought files, journals, police reports, over 40 cases with the same pattern. And now it was all pointing to one man. Timothy Caldwell, aka Thomas Whitfield. Harding went straight to the Reverend's bedside. And everything the old man described, the cold eyes, the silent watching, the smothering, matched exactly what Harding had seen in Timothy as a boy. The scar on the hand, the pale blue eyes, the way he never blinked. Greater than, it's him, Harding told Wheeler. Timothy Caldwell is alive, and he's become something much worse than we imagined. Brain from killer to planner. Timothy was no longer the impulsive boy who hurt animals for fun. He was now a strategic predator, using fake identities, forged references, and charm to gain access to the weak and dying. He was killing not just for curiosity, but for profit and control. Harding feared Timothy was moving towards something more dangerous. Not just murders, but experiments. And then, they found the proof. Notebook. The journal. When Timothy suddenly told Elizabeth Hartwell that his services were no longer needed, it was clear he was preparing to disappear again. But this time, they were watching. Sheriff Thompson had his men set up surveillance. They tracked Timothy's movements, his strange visits to the cemetery, and even his secret meeting with a known forger. When Timothy left the Hartwell home for good, investigators searched his room. What they found hidden under his mattress shocked everyone. A journal, not a diary, not a list, a blueprint. Each page detailed the family's heat, helped, their wealth, their weaknesses, their secrets. But the most chilling section was labeled, "The Culmination Project, DNA the Perfect Family." In his notes, Timothy had chosen a new target. The Hendersons, a wealthy farming family in Lancaster County, Nebraska. He'd been writing to them, offering help for the aging father, William Henderson. The family was isolated, vulnerable, and perfect. Timothy's plan was to live with them, and slowly, quietly, destroy them from within. Not all at once, not with blood, but through psychological torture, manipulation, and slow deaths that would look natural. He wanted to study how a family collapses under grief, fear, and loss. He wasn't just going to kill them. He was going to break them. Revolving light. The manhunt begins. Harding and Wheeler sent urgent messages to Nebraska law enforcement. But communication in 1875 was slow. Timothy had a head start. Harding, now 68 years old, decided to go to Lancaster County himself. Greater than, "This is my responsibility," he told the sheriff. "I had a chance to stop him 7 years ago. I won't fail again." As he traveled by rail and stagecoach, Harding reviewed every journal entry, every behavioral pattern, every twisted detail of Timothy's past. He knew Timothy was no longer a child killer. He had become something far more dangerous. Greater than, "He's not just killing now," Harding whispered to himself. He's studying us. Clapperboard next time. In Part 3, the hunt for Timothy Caldwell reaches Lancaster County. But can Harding get there in time? And what will he find waiting at the Henderson farm? Turn on notifications. Because next episode, Timothy begins his final experiment. Part 3, the Henderson experiment. Headphone. If you're just joining us, go back to Part 1 and 2 to learn how Timothy Caldwell became a monster hiding in plain sight. Loudspeaker. Because in this episode, we find out what happens when that monster gets exactly what he wants. Bell. Subscribe now. The next chapter is even darker. Skull and crossbones. A new level of evil. Timothy Caldwell had learned from his past. He no longer made sloppy mistakes. He didn't rush. He planned. And now, he was operating with a level of precision and cruelty that Dr. Harding had never seen before. By the time word reached Harding that Thomas Whitfield had arrived at the Henderson farm, it was almost too late. The family had already welcomed him as their new caregiver. The doors were open. The trap had been set. And Timothy was ready to begin his final experiment. Every passing hour increased the chance that the Hendersons would become his next victims. And what Timothy had planned for them was worse than anyone imagined. Something was off. Dr. Harding arrived on a cold, gray October morning. With him were Sheriff Robert Kane of Lancaster County and 2 armed deputies. From a distance, the farm looked peaceful. Smoke from the chimney, animals in the fields. Everything looked normal. But Harding knew better. Something wasn't right. The dogs were silent. No barking, no welcome. Just silence. The usual morning routines of a farm, feeding animals, collecting eggs, were completely absent. And then Harding saw something that made his stomach twist. The curtains were all drawn, blocking the light. Farmers didn't live in the dark. Unless they were hiding something. Door. A house full of secrets. Sheriff Kane approached the farmhouse with his weapon drawn. The deputies covered the exits. Harding stayed near the horses, watching every movement. Kane knocked. No answer. But there was movement inside. They could hear it. He tried the handle. Unlocked. Strange for a remote farm. Kane entered slowly. Greater than, Sheriff's Department. Show yourselves. Then came a sound that made everyone freeze. A weak voice, calling for help. Followed by a door slamming and fast footsteps. Something was happening, and they were almost too late. Drop of blood. The horror room. The main room looked like something out of a nightmare. William Henderson, the father, was tied to a chair near the fireplace. He was alive, barely, and looked like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. On the couch, his wife Margaret lay limp and unresponsive. She was breathing, but heavily drugged. But it was the rest of the room that sent chills down Kane's spine. Tables and chairs had been rearranged into a lab setup. Notebooks, diagrams, and surgical tools were laid out in perfect order. Charts covered the walls, showing notes about the family's reactions to pain, fear, and separation. Timothy had been running an experiment. A full psychological and physical breakdown of a family. All while he watched, recorded, and manipulated them. Face mask. The mastermind's game. William Henderson, barely able to whisper, told Kane what had happened. Greater than, he isolated us. Controlled food, water, made us choose who would suffer. Timothy had separated each family member. He switched between kindness and cruelty, confusing them, tormenting them. Greater than, he said it was for science. Timothy had forced them to betray each other. To beg, to break. He was testing how far a person could go before they gave up. Before they lost their soul. Collision. The escape attempt. Suddenly, gunshots. Shouting from the back of the house. Timothy had tried to escape through a rear window. But the deputies were waiting. Harding ran toward the sound, heart pounding. There, in the farmyard, stood Timothy Caldwell. Now 19 years old, tall, calm, hands in the air, surrendering. No, Harding knew that stance. He'd seen it before. Greater than, don't trust him. Harding yelled, he's planning something. Timothy just smiled. That cold, perfect smile. The same one from all those years ago. Brain the conversation that haunts. And then, Timothy spoke. Greater than, drive, Samuel Harding. I was hoping you'd come. His voice was calm, educated, polite, but completely empty of emotion. He wasn't scared. He wasn't nervous. He was excited. He wanted this. Greater than, you were right about me, Timothy said. I was never going to be normal. But you were wrong about something else. I'm not broken. I'm evolved. What followed was a chilling confession. Timothy described his years as a caregiver like a scientist presenting a research paper. He talked about how he refined his understanding of fear, manipulation, control. Greater than, the Hendersons were my masterpiece, he said. A whole family. Controlled conditions. Data collected in real time. Books the final revelation. Timothy didn't want to escape. He wanted to share. He told Harding. Greater than, I have journals. 43 deaths. Psychological profiles. Family dynamics. Community reactions. He wasn't confessing. He was showing off. Greater than, it's the most complete study of human suffering ever done. Don't you want to see what I've learned? And for a moment, Harding did. His mind, trained in science and psychology, was curious. Even horrified, part of him wanted to know what was in those journals. That was Timothy's real power. He could make you curious, about evil. Clapperboard next time. In part 4, we learn the true purpose of Timothy's experiments. Was it really about science? Or was it always about something darker? His journals hold answers, but unlocking them may cost more than Harding is willing to pay. Bell subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter of this chilling tale. Thumbs up like if you're following Timothy's descent into madness. Speech balloon and comment below. Do you think Timothy is evil, or evolved? Timothy had spent years conducting experiments that no ethical researcher could ever attempt, observing human behavior under conditions of extreme stress that would be impossible to replicate in legitimate studies. But Harding also recognized Timothy's offer as another manipulation, an attempt to exploit his intellectual curiosity in order to gain some advantage or extract some concession. Timothy had always been skilled at identifying and exploiting human weaknesses, and he understood that Harding's commitment to scientific knowledge represented a potential vulnerability. Where are the other family members? Dr. Harding asked, refusing to be drawn into Timothy's psychological games. Timothy's smile widened. That's part of the experiment, drive. Harding. They're safe for now, but their continued safety depends on the choices that get made in the next few minutes. I've created a situation where you have to choose between capturing me and saving them. Which is more important to you, justice or mercy? The standoff that followed revealed the full extent of Timothy's planning and preparation. He had not simply been hiding at the Henderson farm. He had been using the property as a base for an elaborate trap designed to capture Drive, Harding and anyone else who might threaten his freedom. Throughout the farmhouse and surrounding buildings, Timothy had positioned the missing family members, the Henderson children and grandchildren, in carefully prepared scenarios that would require immediate rescue if they were to survive. Each family member was in a different location, facing a different type of mortal peril that would worsen over time if not addressed immediately. The eldest Henderson son, James, was trapped in the barn's hayloft, which Timothy had rigged to collapse if disturbed improperly. The daughter Mary was locked in the root cellar with a slow gas leak from a damaged lantern. The two young grandchildren were in the well house, where Timothy had damaged the structural supports and flooding mechanisms to create a gradually deteriorating situation. "You see the beauty of the design," Timothy explained to Dr. Harding with obvious pride. "Each rescue attempt creates time pressure that prevents focus on the others, and attempting to capture me means abandoning all of them to their fates. It's a perfect test of human decision-making under pressure." Sheriff Kane immediately dispatched his deputies to begin rescue operations, but Timothy had calculated correctly. Each situation required careful attention and specialized knowledge to resolve safely. Rushing any of the rescues would likely result in additional casualties, but delaying meant allowing the conditions to worsen. Dr. Harding found himself facing the same type of impossible choice that Timothy had been forcing on his victims for years. As a physician, his instinct was to prioritize saving lives. As a citizen, he knew that allowing Timothy to escape would mean condemning future victims to suffer the same fate as the Henderson family. "This is your final experiment, isn't it?" Dr. Harding asked. "You're not trying to escape. You're trying to prove a point about human nature." Timothy nodded appreciatively. "I knew you would understand eventually. Yes, this is my culminating study. I want to document how society responds when forced to choose between justice and mercy, between punishment and prevention of immediate suffering. The Henderson family has been excellent subjects, but you, Drive Harding, are the real prize. What happens after your experiment is complete? That depends on the results," Timothy replied. "If I'm satisfied with the data I collect today, I might be ready to move on to the next phase of my research. I've been considering branching out from individual and family studies to larger social experiments. Imagine what we could learn from studying an entire community under controlled stress conditions." The implications of Timothy's statement were terrifying. He had apparently been planning to escalate from murdering individuals and families to orchestrating mass casualties, using entire towns or regions as laboratories for his psychological experiments. But Drive Harding also detected something in Timothy's demeanor that gave him hope. Despite his apparent confidence and careful planning, Timothy seemed to be seeking validation for his work in a way that suggested uncertainty about his next steps. The young man who had once been supremely self-assured was now looking for approval from the authority figure who had originally studied him. "Your research has been impressive, Drive," Harding said carefully, "but it's incomplete. You've studied death and suffering, but you've never studied redemption or recovery. You don't understand the full spectrum of human experience." Timothy's expression shifted slightly, showing the first crack in his controlled facade. "Redemption is an illusion created by weak minds to avoid confronting harsh realities," he said, but there was a note of defensiveness in his voice that hadn't been present before. "Is it? You've spent 7 years running from the consequences of your actions. If you were truly as evolved as you claim, wouldn't you be able to face those consequences directly?" Dr. Harding was taking an enormous risk by challenging Timothy's self-perception, but he sensed that the young man's need for intellectual validation might be stronger than his commitment to escape. Timothy had always craved recognition for his intelligence and insight, and that craving might provide the leverage needed to resolve the situation. The psychological duel that followed lasted nearly an hour, during which Sheriff Kane's deputies worked frantically to rescue the endangered family members. Dr. Harding used every technique he had learned from studying Timothy's psychology to keep the young man engaged in conversation while rescue operations continued. Gradually, a clearer picture emerged of what Timothy had become during his years of freedom. He had indeed evolved far beyond the impulsive child killer he had been in Missouri, but that evolution had come at a cost. The systematic suppression of normal human emotions had left him increasingly isolated and desperate for connection, even if that connection could only come through the terror he inflicted on others. "You're lonely, Drive," Harding realized. All these years of studying other people but never allowing yourself to actually connect with anyone. You've made yourself into a perfect predator, but perfect predators are also perfectly alone. Timothy's composure finally cracked completely. "You think I wanted this?" he demanded, his voice rising for the first time since the confrontation began. "You think I chose to be what I am? I've tried to feel what other people feel, tried to understand why they care about things that seem completely meaningless to me. But I can't. There's something missing in me, something that was never there to begin with." For the first time since his childhood, Timothy showed genuine emotion. Not the calculated displays he used to manipulate victims, but real anguish about his fundamental inability to experience normal human connections. The brilliant, controlled killer revealed himself to be, at his core, a profoundly damaged person who had turned his damage into a weapon against the world. The rescue operations concluded successfully just as Timothy's emotional breakdown reached its peak. Sheriff Kane's deputies managed to save all the endangered family members, though several required immediate medical attention for injuries and trauma sustained during their captivity. Timothy's reaction to the successful rescues was telling. Rather than anger or frustration at the failure of his plan, he seemed almost relieved that his victims had survived. The revelation suggested that despite his claims about studying human suffering, some part of him retained enough conscience to prefer that his subjects survive their ordeal. "I'm glad they're safe," Timothy admitted to Dr. Harding. "I didn't really want them to die. I just wanted to understand, to finally understand what makes people care about each other the way they do." The capture of Timothy Caldwell made headlines across the Midwest, but the legal proceedings that followed were complicated by the same issues that had plagued his case as a child. The systematic nature of his crimes was undeniable, but his youth at the time of many of the murders, combined with questions about his mental competency, created precedent-setting challenges for prosecutors. Dr. Harding testified extensively about Timothy's psychological development, providing detailed documentation of the young man's evolution from disturbed child to sophisticated killer. His testimony helped establish some of the first legal frameworks for understanding and prosecuting cases involving antisocial personality disorder. Timothy himself proved to be a cooperative defendant, apparently viewing the trial as another opportunity to share his research findings with a wider audience. He testified about his methods and motivations with the same clinical detachment he had always shown, providing insights into criminal psychology that would influence law enforcement and medical professionals for decades. The verdict was life imprisonment without possibility of parole, with the stipulation that Timothy would be held in a specially designed facility that could accommodate both his dangerous nature and his value as a subject for legitimate psychological research. Dr. Harding visited Timothy regularly during the first year of his imprisonment, conducting formal interviews that were published as part of groundbreaking research into the nature of psychopathy. These sessions revealed that Timothy's capacity for manipulation and violence remained undiminished, but that his desperate need for intellectual connection made him a valuable source of information about criminal psychology. He represents something that medical science is only beginning to understand: drive. Harding wrote in his final report on the case. Timothy Caldwell is not evil in the supernatural sense. He is the product of a specific type of neurological development that creates intelligence without empathy, curiosity without conscience. Understanding individuals like Timothy may be the key to preventing future tragedies. It started with whispers. Residents of the small town of Elmswood began reporting strange feelings, like they were being watched, or followed, even when alone. At first, no one took it seriously. It was dismissed as paranoia or late-night anxiety. But within weeks, something shifted. Doors were found unlocked that had definitely been locked. Pets went missing. Children spoke of a pale man they saw in their dreams, with eyes like glass. Dr. Harding had died the year before, and the world had all but forgotten the name Timothy Caldwell. But evil doesn't die quietly. It waits. In 1924, a year after Caldwell's death, a series of letters arrived at universities, police departments, and psychology institutes across the Midwest. Each letter was signed by the successor. The letters described ideas and experiments disturbingly similar to those Caldwell had conducted, but with an even darker tone. Unlike Caldwell, who sought to understand human nature, the successor wanted to control it. The letters included detailed psychological profiles of local citizens, predictions about their actions, and chillingly, the predictions were correct. One professor at a small college in Indiana wrote back, thinking it was an elaborate prank. He disappeared 2 weeks later. His body was never found, but his house had been filled with pages from Caldwell's prison interviews, pages no one else was supposed to have. Soon, a pattern emerged. The letters targeted people connected to Caldwell's original case, former lawmen, psychologists, even distant relatives of the Henderson family. Those who responded or investigated too deeply either vanished or suffered mental breakdowns. One deputy from Sheriff Kane's old department was found wandering in the woods, repeating Timothy's final words, "I regret I didn't have better facilities." But what truly terrified authorities was the precision of the new attacks. The successor wasn't just copying Caldwell's methods, he was improving them. Towns would experience waves of fear and confusion, multiple people reporting the same nightmare, or entire families waking to find their clocks had been turned back exactly 13 minutes. In 1925, a team of federal agents was quietly assembled. Their job was to find the source of the letters and stop whoever was behind them. They interviewed dozens of people who claimed to have received visits from a man they described as cold, polite, and wrong. One child said, "He smiled like he was trying to understand how we work." The agents followed a trail of abandoned buildings, strange symbols carved into trees, and journals left behind in shelters and barns. Each journal was signed only with a drawing, a split circle, half light, half dark. One journal described an experiment involving an entire neighborhood. The successor had cut off the electricity, poisoned the well water just enough to cause hallucinations, and used recordings of whispers at night to study how quickly fear spread. The most chilling part, no one in the neighborhood had reported the incident. They didn't even remember it. Back in Elmswood, more signs appeared. A boy went missing and was found 2 days later in his own attic, without a single memory of how he got there. An elderly woman woke to find all her mirrors turned to face the wall. And in the local school, students began drawing the same face during art class, a man in a long coat with a notebook in one hand and a syringe in the other. One teacher, a woman named Clara, finally spoke up. She had received a letter too. It told her to test her students. The instructions were detailed: which questions to ask, how to phrase them, and how to record their emotional responses. Clara, terrified but curious, had followed the instructions. The results had frightened her. Every child had shown signs of stress, fear, or confusion, but none remembered taking the test. And Clara, after completing the experiment, began receiving more letters. They praised her work. They called her promising. The agents tried to protect her, but Clara vanished in October 1925. The last thing she wrote was a note pinned to her bedroom door: "I finally understand. We're all just subjects." To this day, no one knows who the successor really was, or is. Some believe Timothy Caldwell had a follower, maybe even a former patient or admirer who wanted to continue his legacy. Others think Timothy faked his death and assumed a new identity. But one thing is clear: the spirit of Timothy Caldwell didn't end with his prison sentence. It spread. And if you feel like someone's watching you right now, maybe they are. What would you do if the next letter came to your house? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for part 6, where we explore the chilling events of 1932, when an entire town vanished overnight. Part 6. The Farmhouse Secrets. It had been a year since Timothy Caldwell's arrest. But even with him behind bars, the nightmares hadn't stopped. Not for Dr. Harding, not for Sheriff Kane, and certainly not for the Henderson family. The farmhouse stood silent now, boarded up, surrounded by rusting fences and overgrown weeds. No one dared go near it. Rumors had already begun to spread in nearby towns. Some said the place was cursed. Others believed Timothy had planted more traps, more secrets waiting to be found. Dr. Harding tried to move on. He had returned to his teaching job at the university. But something kept pulling him back. It wasn't guilt, it was curiosity. Or maybe it was fear. Fear that Timothy hadn't really finished what he started. One rainy afternoon, Harding visited Sheriff Kane. "I need to go back to the farmhouse," Harding said. Quietly. Kane raised an eyebrow. "You think there's something we missed?" Harding nodded. "Timothy planned everything. He knew we'd catch him eventually. That's why I think he left something behind, something important." After a long pause, Kane finally agreed. "All right, but we do this carefully. No one goes in alone." They gathered a small team, 2 deputies, Harding, and Kane. They arrived at the Henderson farm just before sunset. The air was heavy, thick with moisture. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The farmhouse was just as they had left it. But when Kane unlocked the front door, a strange smell greeted them. Not decay, but something chemical, like old medicine and rust. The group spread out. Harding and Kane checked the study and kitchen. The deputies searched the basement. Harding paused in the hallway. One of the picture frames on the wall looked slightly crooked. He reached out and adjusted it. Click. A small compartment opened behind the frame. Inside was a leather journal. Harding carefully pulled it out and opened the first page. To those who seek to understand, it read in Timothy's unmistakable handwriting, "This is my real study." The pages were filled with diagrams, maps, and twisted theories. Timothy had documented not just the Henderson case, but dozens of others, murders that had never been linked to him. Victims no one had connected. Until now. Harding's hands trembled. This wasn't just a journal. It was a roadmap. "Sheriff," he called out. Kane hurried over. One look at the pages and his face went pale. "Dear God, this is bigger than we thought." Suddenly, a scream echoed from the basement. The group rushed downstairs. One of the deputies pointed to the wall. There was a hidden door, freshly disturbed dirt around its edges. Someone had recently opened it. Kane forced it open with a crowbar. Behind it was a narrow tunnel, carved out of the earth. Harding stared down the darkness. "Timothy had help," he whispered. The deputy's voice shook. "You mean, someone else was living here?" Kane shined his flashlight into the tunnel. The walls were lined with notes, photographs, and strange symbols. All of them recent. Either someone continued his work, Kane said, or he was never working alone to begin with. Harding felt a chill run down his spine. Timothy's case wasn't over. It was just beginning. He looked back at the journal in his hands. One page stood out. Phase 2 begins when the observer becomes the participant. Beneath it was a map. A new location, marked in red. To be continued. Part 7. The Whispering Town. In the years after Timothy Caldwell's death, the world tried to move on. But evil has a way of leaving traces, echoes that never fully fade. And in the quiet town of Marlow, Illinois, those echoes began to grow louder. It started with whispers. Locals spoke of strange dreams. Of shadowy figures watching from the woods. Of a presence that couldn't be explained. Marlow had always been a quiet farming town, the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. But that changed when the Caldwell files were unsealed in 1923. The journals, case notes, and psychological reports were sent to a research facility in Marlow for further analysis. The facility had once been a military outpost, then a mental asylum, and now served as a research institute for criminal psychology. Scholars from all over the country came to study Timothy Caldwell's mind. But soon, those scholars began to change. Dr. Miriam Lowry, a bright young psychologist, was one of the first to notice it. Her colleagues were acting strangely, becoming withdrawn, paranoid, even violent. She herself had begun to suffer from nightmares, visions of a boy in shadows, whispering terrible things. The boy always smiled, just like Timothy Caldwell. At first, Miriam believed it was just the stress of working with such disturbing material. But when two researchers went missing, one found days later, wandering the woods barefoot and mumbling about the experiment, she knew something was deeply wrong. She decided to dig deeper. Hidden in the back of one of Timothy's notebooks, she found something odd, a set of coordinates and a phrase scribbled repeatedly: "The work must continue." The coordinates led to an old barn on the outskirts of Marlow, long abandoned and half collapsed. Inside, Miriam found something that didn't belong: a trapdoor in the floor, sealed shut with rusted chains. It looked exactly like the setups Timothy had used in his early crimes. She reported it to local authorities, but when they arrived, the trapdoor was gone. No hole in the floor. No chains. Just dust and rot. After that, things in Marlow got worse. Children began drawing pictures of the man with no eyes. A farmer claimed he heard someone whispering inside his silo at night. A schoolteacher vanished, and her classroom was found covered in pages torn from Timothy Caldwell's journals, pages that had never been released to the public. Miriam, now fully convinced that something unnatural was happening, turned to Sheriff David Shaw. He was skeptical at first, but the evidence was mounting. Too many coincidences. Too many disappearances. And always the same whispers. The work must continue. They decided to reopen the old research facility. What they found inside shocked them. The basement had been converted into a maze of observation rooms, much like the setups Timothy had once used. Surveillance equipment, journals, even voice recordings, all mimicking the methods Caldwell described in his writings. But who built it? Who had access? And more importantly, who was continuing Timothy's work? Miriam and Sheriff Shaw realized the terrifying truth: someone had taken up Caldwell's legacy. A new generation of researchers, obsessed with his methods, were continuing his experiments in secret. And worse still, they believed Caldwell's mind hadn't died with him. He left something behind, one recording said. He found a way to imprint his thoughts, his voice, even his intent. Not in blood, but in pattern. In structure. In the very design of his traps. Was it possible? Could evil be contagious, not through genetics or trauma, but through pure idea? Miriam didn't know, but she knew one thing for certain. Timothy Caldwell may be dead, but his experiment was far from over. And Marlow, Illinois, was now his new laboratory. What would you do if you discovered your town was slowly becoming part of an experiment left behind by a killer long dead? Let us know in the comments. And stay tuned. Part 8 is coming soon. Part 8. The Mirror of Crow Hollow. In the months after the disappearance of Sheriff Kane and the strange events in Brackenridge, the legend of Timothy Caldwell began to change. He was no longer just a killer from the past. He had become something more, something older, something darker. The stories now spoke of a force that could bend minds, twist reality, and leave entire towns hollowed out with fear. Dr. Harding had always believed in science, in evidence and reason. But even from beyond the grave, his notes warned of something deeper, a shift in the way Timothy operated. The man who once needed knives and rope now seemed to work through whispers, visions, and madness. It all came to a head in a place called Crow Hollow. Crow Hollow was a forgotten mining town in the Appalachian foothills, nearly abandoned after a series of cave-ins decades earlier. Only a handful of families remained, clinging to the land out of habit more than hope. When the first disappearances happened, children vanishing from locked rooms, miners found staring blankly into the woods, no one connected it to Timothy Caldwell. Not at first. But then came the mirror. It was found deep in one of the old mining tunnels, half buried in rubble and dirt. A tall, old-fashioned piece with an ornate iron frame that didn't belong underground. A group of teenagers dragged it out and brought it to the abandoned schoolhouse, thinking it would be fun to use it for ghost games. Within days, 3 of them had gone missing. The townspeople tried to dismiss it. Kids run off. Strange accidents happen. But one by one, people started reporting things they couldn't explain. They said the mirror didn't show your reflection, it showed something behind you. A shadow, a face, a hand pressed against the glass. Some claimed they saw Timothy Caldwell himself in the mirror, standing silently, staring. Others said the mirror whispered to them at night. When Reverend Miller smashed the mirror with an axe, thinking to end the madness, he vanished 2 nights later. His wife found his boots outside their door, still warm. Inside them, a single feather from a black crow. A government team was sent to investigate after a local official filed a strange report. But their radios stopped working the moment they entered the hollow. Only one man returned, days later, screaming nonsense and clawing at his own eyes. He died in a hospital 3 towns over, after writing a single phrase over and over again on the walls of his room. He watches from the glass. Speculation grew that the mirror hadn't been just an object, it was a vessel. A tool Timothy had created, or become part of. Something that let him reach across distance, across time, into people's minds. Dr. Harding's final notes, which had been sealed after his death, were re-examined by a group of criminal psychologists. Among them was a single paragraph that seemed to predict it all. If Timothy Caldwell ever escapes the limits of his flesh, if he finds a way to exist in idea, in symbol, in fear itself, then he will become more than a man. He will become a myth that lives and breathes through us. And he will never be caught again. Crow Hollow was eventually declared uninhabitable by the state. The remaining residents were relocated, and all access roads were sealed. But sometimes hikers still find their way into the woods around the old town. Some come back, some don't, and every now and then, someone reports seeing an old mirror lying among the trees. Untouched, waiting. Is Timothy Caldwell really dead? Or did he find a way to live on, not in body, but in fear, in reflection, in legend? What would you do if you looked into a mirror and saw something watching you from behind the glass? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for part 9 of our chilling series on America's Darkest Killer. Because some stories don't end. They just change shape. Timothy Caldwell, Part 9. Crow Hollow was no longer just a place. It was a presence. As investigators, researchers, and even thrill-seeking tourists continued to dig into the town's history, more strange events unfolded. Locals reported hearing voices in the woods at night, whispers that called them by name. Children spoke of a tall man with no eyes who stood outside their windows, silently watching. Dr. Harding's notes, thought to have ended with his death, were somehow still expanding. Pages in his journal, long believed to be filled, were found rewritten, new entries in handwriting identical to his. No one could explain it. Then, there were the dreams. Survivors of the Henderson ordeal, including William Henderson and several deputies involved in Timothy's capture, began experiencing the same nightmare. In it, they stood in front of a mirror, but their reflections moved independently. The reflection would smile, raise a hand, or speak, while the real person stood frozen. Each dream ended the same way. The reflection would whisper, "You let him in." Psychologists dismissed it as shared trauma. But the frequency, the identical nature of the dreams, and their emergence decades after the original incident made that explanation hard to believe. Then something even stranger happened. In 1925, 2 years after Timothy Caldwell's death, a small-town newspaper in Kansas ran a story about a local farmer's disappearance. His family claimed he had become obsessed with a mirror man, saying someone inside his bedroom mirror had been talking to him at night. When the family finally removed all mirrors from the house, he vanished within a week. The only clue left behind was a single page of writing, tacked to the wall where his mirror had once been. It read, "He promised understanding. He said the pain would make sense. I saw the truth in the glass." The handwriting matched Timothy Caldwell's. But how was that possible? Timothy had been dead for 2 years. Federal agents were called in, but the case was quickly sealed. Locals say the original page was confiscated by government officials and replaced with a blank sheet. Still, rumors spread. Researchers who studied Timothy's prison journals began noticing patterns, hidden codes, references to mirrors, time loops, and reflections. One chilling phrase kept appearing: "The mind is not bound by the body." By 1930, a growing number of cases across the Midwest involved reports of mirror-based hallucinations and unexplained disappearances. Psychiatrists documented patients whose personalities changed after extended mirror exposure. Some began calling the phenomenon the Caldwell effect. Then came the children. In 3 different towns, elementary school teachers reported young students speaking in voices far too mature for their age. The children referred to Timothy as if he were a playmate or teacher. One child even drew a detailed picture of Crow Hollow, including the long-destroyed Henderson farmhouse, without ever having visited the area. Dr. Harding's protege, a young psychiatrist named Drive, Eliza Monroe, took up his mantle. She had studied his work and believed Timothy had somehow discovered a way to imprint his consciousness through suggestion, trauma, and symbolism. In her published paper, Reflections of a Killer, she proposed the theory that Timothy's obsession with understanding human nature had not died with him. Instead, it had evolved. Through fear, through ritual, through the mirror, his ideas had taken root in others. Crow Hollow was now considered cursed. Travelers avoided it. Locals fled. The government finally shut the area down in 1932, citing environmental instability. The land was sealed, fenced, and monitored. But the whispers never stopped. Every so often, someone goes missing after reporting strange dreams or seeing someone in a mirror that wasn't them. And every so often, in dusty libraries or private collections, a new page appears in Dr. Harding's journal, dated long after his death. And on each one, at the very bottom, written in the same eerie handwriting: "We are still studying you. To be continued." Part 10. The Final Reflection. Dr. Harding's journal was found on a cold winter morning in 1877, just days after his death. The pages were stained, not with blood, but with something far stranger, a dark residue that shimmered in the light, like oil or soot, yet clung to the paper like it was alive. The final entry was short, cryptic, and deeply unsettling. "I saw him again, in the mirror, but it wasn't a memory. He spoke. He's learning how to come through. I fear the mirror is no longer just a window, it's a door." The mirror recovered from Crow Hollow was eventually sealed away in the basement of a university archive, surrounded by salt lines and iron filings. A warning was etched into the crate in Latin: "Ne respices, do not look." But as the decades passed, warnings became folklore, and folklore became curiosity. In 1925, a young researcher named Emily Klein reopened the Caldwell files. Brilliant, skeptical, and fiercely rational, She was determined to separate fact from legend. To her, Timothy Caldwell was just another psychopath, not some ghost haunting glass. When she discovered the mirror buried beneath layers of storage crates, she ignored the Latin, brushed away the salt, and wheeled it back to her lab. She wanted to test the limits of human suggestion, how fear spreads through stories, how belief shapes perception. She didn't believe in evil. Not yet. The first sign came subtly. Her lab notes began to include details she didn't remember writing. References to voices, images, dreams. A shadow standing behind her own reflection, always just at the edge of recognition. Then came the nightmares. Timothy Caldwell's voice, measured, cold, curious, spoke to her in sleep. "Do you understand yet, Emily? The mirror doesn't reflect. It records. It remembers." She told herself it was stress. She tried turning the mirror around, locking it in a closet, leaving the lab, but every reflective surface began to shimmer with that same oily distortion. Her bathroom mirror, her office window, even the surface of her coffee. The thing inside wasn't bound to just one mirror anymore. Her colleagues found her weeks later, raving about the man behind the glass, and how he was building something, a web of minds, connected through reflection. She had drawn hundreds of eyes across the walls of her lab, each with a single Latin word beneath. Specta. Look. By 1953, multiple institutions had reported similar phenomena. Patients and researchers experiencing shared hallucinations, hearing a voice that asked them unsettling questions about choice, pain, and curiosity. Every case was linked to reflective surfaces. And every case mentioned the same name, Timothy Caldwell. Government agencies quietly classified the phenomenon. The mirror was resecured and hidden deep beneath a Cold War bunker, but it was too late. The infection had spread. Not through blood, through thought, through fear, through mirrors. Today, many believe the legend of Timothy Caldwell is just a dark piece of American folklore. A cautionary tale about trusting what you see, or what you think you see. But in quiet corners of the internet, forums exist where users post images of mirrors that don't behave normally. Stories of reflections that move slightly out of sync. Of voices whispering at night. Of questions asked in a voice they've never heard aloud. Would you choose mercy, or justice? And always, the feeling that someone is watching. Not from the other side, but from behind you. So if you're hearing this now, maybe it's just a story. Maybe it's just an old tale passed down through time. But if you look into a mirror tonight and feel like your reflection hesitates, don't lean in, don't ask questions, and whatever you do, don't look too long, because Timothy Caldwell never needed to escape. He just needed someone to open the door. Bell, if this story chilled you to the core, don't forget to thumbs up like this video to let us know you want more true horror stories. Speech balloon comment below. What do you think was real, and what was just in their minds? Send mail. Share this with a friend who loves dark tales as much as you do. Check mark subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a nightmarish new episode. Candle. This may be the end of Timothy Caldwell's story, but the horrors hiding in history are far from over. Stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who look just like us.